Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Marie Goy. Our top stories. Brazil's former president Lula fights his 12-year jail sentence as his lawyers ask the Supreme Court to suspend his prison order. US shares slide after President Trump threatens new tariffs on China. Doctors say Sergei Skripal, the former Russian spy poisoned with a nerve agent, is making a rapid recovery. Police in New York charge martial arts fighter Conor McGregor with assault and criminal mischief. Hello, thanks for joining us. The former president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, has defied the deadline set by a court for him to surrender to police. His lawyers are in negotiations with the authorities and have filed a motion to the Supreme Court to suspend a prison order. Lula was sentenced to 12 years for corruption, although he says the charges against him are politically motivated. Lebo Di Secco has the latest.
His supporters demanding no to jail for Lula. And it seems Brazil's former president is in no hurry to go. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva holed up in a union building in his hometown of São Bernardo do Campo, hours after he was meant to surrender to police to start a 12-year prison term for corruption. His supporters say the conviction is political, designed to stop a man of the people from running for president in October, a poll that he was favourite to win.
If Lula is arrested, it would be as if the underprivileged class was arrested as well.
People will go in the street. People will come tomorrow and won't let anyone enter to get him out.
But the anti-Lula voices are just as loud. Outside the police headquarters, his detractors called Lula a crook and a thief who belongs in prison. This isn't a carnival truck. Instead, they're celebrating Operation Car Wash, the huge anti-corruption investigation which led to Lula's conviction.
I came here just so I could see up close when this crooked man, Lula, goes to prison.
Federal police had said they'd prepared a special cell for Lula in view of his importance. But with his legal team filing last-minute paperwork to keep him out of prison, if and when he sees the inside of it remains to be seen. Lebo Di Secco, BBC News.
As fears of a trade war between the US and China are escalating, shares on Wall Street have taken yet another dive. The Dow Jones closing down 575 points, or just over 2%. President Trump has threatened to slap an additional $100 billion of tariffs on Chinese goods. The White House is putting the blame directly on Beijing.
This is something that China has created, and President Trump is trying to fix it. And we are moving forward in that process of we're going to continue putting pressure on China to stop in the illegal and unfair trade practices that they've continued in for decades.
Well, earlier I spoke to our correspondent, Chris Buckler in Washington, and I asked him if the markets are getting nervous.
Yeah, they don't like it, and this talk of tariffs, what once may have been looked upon as threats, is starting to now result in what look more like real actions. We did already have some suggestion that some of those tariffs that China had suggested would be going into effect on Monday. And when you look at the range of things that are suggested here, they cover a whole range of goods. It goes from planes and pork to transport to technology, from bourbon to beef. The reality is that we have both America and China drawing up a list in what is in real danger of becoming this tit-for-tat trade battle. And already there are some starting to talk about this being a trade war. And talking toughest in all of this is President Trump. He's the one that keeps on making these threats. Now, there are others in the administration who are trying to play this differently. I mean, we've had his economic advisor, we've had the Treasury Secretary, both out today saying, listen, there is still the potential for talk here. We want to talk to the Chinese. We want to try and perhaps contain this a little bit. These are things that are being suggested. Potentially, could there be a deal here? But any deal could be complicated, and certainly it has spooked the markets.
Because supposedly the ever so important meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un takes place next month, and China is of course a major player in all of that.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to look at this in two ways. There's diplomacy and there's economy. Now, in the issue of the economy, that is where President Trump wants to particularly be seen to be tough. And I think you're right whenever you said that part of that is about a domestic audience. He does want to be seen as tough on these issues, standing up for America. You heard all of that America First rhetoric during the election campaign, and he hasn't walked away for that. But he also seems to recognise that China is an important partner internationally, and certainly he's talked in the past about his relationship with President Xi. So you have these two very different approaches going on as far as President Trump is concerned, but also, as I mentioned, the administration. And it's worth mentioning that although this may play well with some voters, there are business leaders who are concerned about all of this. Wall Street, as we've mentioned, is concerned about all of this. And although they've been playing down talk of a trade war, they really don't like that idea of mentioning a trade war. It has to be said that today, whenever the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, was asked specifically about that, he said, listen, we want to talk, but there is the potential of a trade war. That means that both America and China have some thinking to do. But at the moment, America seems to be talking more about tariffs, and in response you have China making very clear that they are quite prepared to take retaliatory action yet again.
Now, doctors treating the former Russian spy who was attacked with a nerve agent in the UK say he's no longer in a critical condition. It's nearly 5 weeks since Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were found slumped on a park bench in Salisbury. Britain says Russia is behind the poisonings, but Moscow continues to deny any involvement. Leila Nathu reports.
They were targeted with a chemical weapon. Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia, seen here in newly released family photos taken in Russia.
They were hospitalized more than a month ago after being exposed to a nerve agent, a toxic chemical designed to shut down the human body. But they have been fighting its effects, and today the hospital gave this update.
As Yulia herself says, her strength is growing daily, and she can look forward to the day when she's well enough to leave hospital. I also want to update you on the condition of her father, Sergei Skripal. He's responding well to treatment, improving rapidly, and is no longer in a critical condition.
It was on the 4th of March that the two were found incapacitated in the centre of Salisbury. They were critically ill. A police officer who was one of the first to respond to the incident was also admitted to hospital. He was discharged a fortnight later. The Skripals had been heavily sedated and unable to communicate, but last week Yulia regained consciousness. Now her father too appears to be making progress.
It's fantastic news, somewhat unexpected I think. We were obviously concerned they were in a very serious state, but we heard earlier this week that Yulia is getting better. But to hear that Sergei himself is also recovering well is excellent news, and I hope to hear more encouraging news in the weeks ahead.
In a statement, a spokesperson for the Foreign Office said, "We are very pleased that both Mr. Skripal and his daughter Yulia are improving. This is a tribute to the hard-working and talented NHS staff in Salisbury who have provided outstanding care. The NHS will continue to provide ongoing care for the Skripals, both of whom are likely to have ongoing medical needs." Yulia Skripal is communicating. Yesterday she put out a statement via police saying she was getting stronger daily. But it's not yet clear whether Sergei Skripal is recovering to the same extent.
But how is it that either of them have been able to withstand the impact of such a deadly substance?
There are so many variables that a poisoning from Novichok might take. So you have the environmental conditions of which the poison might have been left and how he might have picked it up, the quantities that actually got into him. We hear that it's through the skin, which was a lot more of a protective barrier than, for example, if it was inhaled. So overall, it is a pleasant surprise. It is good news for him, and it is good news for the investigation.
Yulia, and perhaps her father too, will now become crucial witnesses in the investigation, described by counter-terror police as one of the largest and most complex they have ever carried out. Leila Nathu, BBC News, Salisbury.
Now, the United States has imposed sanctions on Russian officials and companies accused of profiting from President Putin's efforts to undermine the West. The list includes oligarchs close to the president and a dozen companies they control. Russia has vowed a tough response. Our North America editor John Sopel has the details.
I think it's important to say what these sanctions aren't about. They're not about what has happened in Salisbury and the response to that. We've already had 60 Russian diplomats expelled as a result of that. This is much wider than that. This is about Russian interference in the presidential election. It's about the annexation of Crimea, the Russian behavior in Syria. And also, make no mistake, these are aggressive moves, the most aggressive that we have seen from the Trump administration. And they're going to hit hardest those who are wealthiest and those who are closest to Vladimir Putin. And I suppose the question that's legitimate to ask is, well, why now, given that the events we're talking about are quite some time ago? And it's as though Donald Trump didn't really want to go down this path. He's made clear he wants to rebuild Russia's relation with the United States, and so has congratulated Vladimir Putin on his election victory. He's invited him to come here for talks at the White House. At the same time, you have the administration kind of introducing these very tough measures. It's as though we've got an administration that is trying to look both ways at once.
Now, Palestinian officials say 10 people have died and hundreds more wounded during fresh protests along Gaza's border with Israel. The Israeli army said it opened fire on people who tried to breach its frontier defenses. The Palestinians started holding demonstrations along the border a week ago, demanding refugees and their descendants be allowed to return to land which is now in Israel. From Gaza, Yolande Knell reports.
Billowing black smoke. Young Palestinians burn huge piles of tyres as a smokescreen as they hurl stones at Israeli soldiers, who fire back with tear gas and bullets. This was another bloody Friday on the Gaza border. But Ahmed, his son and grandsons came to peacefully protest and pray. As a toddler 70 years ago, Ahmed lost nearly all his family and his village when the State of Israel was created.
I was one day expelled and deported from my original country with Palestine. I want to return back again. I'm here to tell them I am, with a peaceful way, wants to return back to my homeland.
Israel rejects the claims of Palestinian refugees. Its military says it's been acting here to stop mass infiltrations into Israeli territory. It blames Gaza's Hamas leaders for stirring up violence.
I've just come from the Gaza border, and to my right were Israeli homes, Israeli communities, mothers and fathers trying to protect their children. And just a few football fields away were crowds gathering who've made it clear that their intent is to wipe Israel off the face of the map.
The plan is to continue the border into the middle of next month.
Despite the obvious dangers, Palestinians here say they'll keep up their protests. They'll keep pressing their demands and confronting Israel. On the other side of the border, Israel sees all of this as a huge provocation, and it's threatening a harsh response. Yolande Knell, BBC News in Gaza.
Stay with us on BBC News, still to come. A casual and cultural Friday, the push to get more people wearing a traditional Kitenge dress in East Africa. This is BBC News, the latest headlines. The legal team of Brazil's former president Lula asked the Supreme Court to suspend his 12-year jail sentence hours after he was due to hand himself into police. Let's get more on that story now. Lula's holed up in a union building in his hometown of São Bernardo do Campo. The BBC's Katie Watson is there.
The deadline's been and gone. Lula's not handed himself in to the police in Curitiba. You can see people here are celebrating. They see this as a good thing. But what happens now is very unknown. This is uncharted territory in Brazil, and Brazil is a country known for its political drama. This, perhaps, is one of the most dramatic chapters in the soap opera. Lula is still supposedly holed up in the building behind me in a metal workers' union. He's been there since Thursday night when the arrest warrant was issued. He's not actually come out and spoken. He's popped his head out from time to time. He's still very much in there. And that's the issue. What happens now? Will police come and arrest him? Will his supporters stop those police from coming? Certainly the tension here in Brazil this evening is high.
Katie Watson in Sao Paulo. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news this hour. South Korea's first female president, Park Geun-hye, has been sentenced to 24 years in prison after being found guilty of abuse of power, bribery and coercion. The judge said Ms. Park had conspired with a long-term friend to force some of South Korea's biggest companies to hand over more than $20 million. Ms. Park, who was not at the hearing, has denied any wrongdoing. Syrian activists say that heavy airstrikes on the last rebel-held town in eastern Ghouta have killed at least 32 civilians. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said dozens of airstrikes had hit the town of Douma. One of America's most influential jazz pianists, Cecil Taylor, has died at the age of 89. Born in New York and classically trained, Cecil Taylor developed his own style to become a leading exponent of avant-garde free jazz. Now, Facebook has announced that anyone placing political adverts on its network will have to state who's paying for them. Under the new rules, those posting such as will also be verified their identity and location. The company's chief executive, Mark Zuckerberg, said he wanted to make it harder for fake news to be shared. Our correspondent Dave Lee reports from San Francisco.
One of these measures is to monitor the funding of advertising to see where adverts that have been paid for by a campaign to be on Facebook, to make sure that's completely clear. They're going to make sure that anyone that is placing an advertisement on Facebook around political interest is being verified, and the way they're going to do that is make sure they're using a US government-issued ID. They're going to send an access code to a physical address in the US to prove that a person is based here, and only once they input that access code into Facebook will they be allowed to place any advertising. When it comes to large pages, and of course people on Facebook follow many large pages that have many millions of followers, Facebook's going to take some efforts to verify who is looking after those pages to make sure they are who they say they are, because that was one thing Russian interest did during that election campaign. They pretended to be Americans running pages about American politics, when in reality they were Russian trolls, as has become known, operating out of St. Petersburg. So two things Facebook is hoping to do in order to make sure that the tactics used by Russia perhaps can't be used again. More than 7 million companies and people use Facebook advertising every single month, and so the idea that the company can go through each of those advertisers individually is of course going to be incredibly difficult. Of course, all of this comes ahead of some hearings next week in Washington. Mark Zuckerberg himself is going to be in Congress to answer questions on 2 separate days, and I think many of these changes announced on Friday here in California are going to be designed to make sure that Mr. Zuckerberg can be in front of those senators and representatives, basically saying, look, we are doing things, here are the measures we put in place last week. Whether those changes will be enough to keep those politicians happy remains to be seen. I think there's a lot of ground for Facebook to be making up before it can say that it has this situation under control, but it does seem to think that it's going in the right direction.
Now, the mixed martial arts fighter Conor McGregor has been charged with assault and criminal mischief by police in New York. The former UFC champion is accused of vandalizing a bus containing rival fighters. He's been released on bail, as our sports correspondent Richard Conway reports.
Even in a sport where the hype comes as standard, Conor McGregor may have overplayed his hand. As the Ultimate Fighting Championship, or UFC as it's known, held a media day in New York, McGregor and his entourage stormed the backstage area, attacking a coach containing rival fighters. Video appears to show McGregor throwing a metal trolley, while others rain objects towards the vehicle. With his private jet grounded, the Irishman turned himself into police and, after a night in the cells, was led to court earlier today. A star of UFC, McGregor's future in the sport now appears to be in jeopardy.
It's disgusting, and I don't think anybody is going to be, you know, huge Conor McGregor fans after this.
UFC is hugely popular around the world. The company which organises and promotes the sport was sold 2 years ago for more than £3 billion. Competitors use a combination of fists, knees, elbows and feet in a mix of martial arts.
Conor for BBC, how are you?
And within that world, there is no bigger attraction than McGregor. Supported by UFC, he turned to boxing last summer, taking on but eventually losing to Floyd Mayweather Jr. in one of the most lucrative pay-per-view bouts in history. As a master showman, he revels in creating a circus, causing controversy and being outspoken. All publicity is said to be good publicity, especially for a man who has forged a career as a flamboyant outsider. Any criminal conviction could see Conor McGregor lose his right to work in America. Richard Conway, BBC News.
Now, Dress Down Friday has become a part of corporate culture the world over, but how about a decree that you end your week in traditional African dress? It's actually not that new. Over a decade ago, Ghana did exactly that to promote locally produced products. We sent our man about town, Victor Kenani, on a shopping trip in Nairobi.
The East African community recently passed recommendations for its people to wear kitenges on Friday. They say it represents the true culture of the people.
So welcome to the place that you can get different types of kitenge. Yeah, so we have some from we have from Congo, we have from Mali.
So Seraphine, what defines a kitenge?
Actually, a kitenge is an African print that is mostly used in Africa, ceremonies, or so many things. I use it for interior decoration, like making curtains, pillows. I also make for accessories in fashion.
So for me, I want a suit.
So let's do a pure cotton without the wax, I think so, yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Huh? I think I like it. Looks like good, yeah. Looks good. I'm done with shopping, and so I should be expecting my suit in a day or so. The East African community thinks I look fabulous and more African in it. But what they don't tell you is that the kitenge does not have its roots in Africa to begin with.
The kitenge has its roots in Indonesia, where the wax prints were known as batik. During the colonial era, the Netherlands began manufacturing them and trading them with Africans along the route back to Indonesia. It's taken different names along the way. Bole in Cote d'Ivoire, Kente in Ghana, Ankara in Nigeria, Shweshwe in South Africa, and Kitenge in East Africa.
It's the next day, and now the kitenge is ready. Let's check it out. Wow, a little bit colorful. I like it. But what do other Kenyans think? Let's go find out.
I also love wearing kitenge because it symbolizes our originality as Africans.
How do you see my kitenge?
Really, you look gorgeous, you are so appealing, you see?
Yeah, you look good, you look African. Kitenge is classic, as in it brings out the person you are. It brings out the Africanism in you. Okay, and the color, it matches.
Tunaona design ya sahihi mpaka wanaume pia wanashona kitenge na tena inatoka kwa design nzuri, ambapo kama mimi nikitoka nikienda kwa duka naenda kuchukua kitenge kwa ile design ambayo nilikuwa naitaka, na shona yangu na ya bibi yangu na watoto wangu.
The verdict is out, so expect to see more kitenges coming near you.
Maybe I should be wearing kimono. That's it for this edition. Thanks for joining us.